I've always been a square peg in a world of round holes, not quite fitting in despite my best efforts. Being 14 in a class full of 17-year-olds never felt right. As I sat in Mrs. Thompson's biology class, doodling in my notebook, I could overhear the usual banter, parties, dating, stuff that made me roll my eyes. I found it all so pointless. This whole skipping grade thing started when I was 10. They made me take this IQ test in a room that felt like a hospital. I wasn't scared or anything. I was curious. When they told my parents I should skip a few grades, Mum and Dad were happy but worried too. My first day in junior high was a mess. I was 11 and everyone seemed 2-3 years older than me. Biology was usually a sanctuary, a place to escape. Mrs. Thompson, a woman with a no-nonsense haircut and a stern look, controlled the room like a ship's captain. I thought it would be just another normal Tuesday until the intercom buzzed. The room went from casual to urgent. My pencil was still mid-air when Mrs. Thompson's eyes widened just a fraction of a second before she flew into action. We all moved like wind-up toys, programmed to seek cover. Mrs. Thompson herded us behind lab tables next to cabinets anywhere out of sight. My spot was behind a lab table next to a biology textbook that at that moment lost all its relevance. Nobody spoke. It was as if we were all sharing a terrible secret, and words could make it real. Mrs. Thompson's actions were swift and precise as she locked the door with a sense of urgency. She moved quickly, pulling down the blinds and shutting off the lights, her movements sharp and efficient. The room plunged into semi-darkness, leaving everyone in a state of confusion and uncertainty. The classmates exchanged worried glances, silently questioning what was happening. In the dimly lit room, a heavy silence was broken by the distant, faint sound of screams. At first, these screams seemed like a soft, unsettling murmur, barely audible. However, as moments passed, they grew in intensity, transforming into loud, desperate cries that pierced the silence. The atmosphere in the room grew tense, a mix of fear and apprehension spreading among us. We huddled together. Mrs. Thompson, usually composed, looked visibly shaken as she instructed us to stay quiet and keep away from the windows. The screams sounded nothing like I'd heard in movies or on TV. This was real, visceral, and terrifying. Without warning, a pounding began. Doors down the hall, thudding, each hit resonating in the pit of my stomach. The sound was methodical, deliberate, and growing closer. As I tried to picture what was causing it, my mind drew blank, the horror too much for my active imagination. The room was thick with tension. We looked at each other, our eyes wide with shared fear. For a 14-year-old who'd always felt out of place, I now felt even more vulnerable. My palms were clammy, my heartbeat erratic, and I tasted something metallic, like I'd bitten down on a coin. The abrupt, jarring crash shattered the stillness, violently interrupting my thoughts. A filthy fist, stained with traces of dried blood, violently broke through the glass pane of our classroom door. Robert, typically the epitome of composure, stumbled backward in shock, his movement sending a chair clattering to the ground. Amid this commotion, a chilling sight caught my eye. A lighter's flame, small yet menacing, ignited the tip of a cloth protruding from a bottle. A sense of dread overwhelmed me as I watched, helpless and horrified. The Molotov cocktail was hurled with force, its fiery tail blazing. It collided against our door with a shattering impact, flames bursting forth and spreading rapidly. The fire's eerie glow bathed the room in a sinister light. Panic gripped everyone as the realization of our difficult situation sank in. The heat from the flames was suffocating, and the acrid smell of burning filled the air. The room, now a scene of terror, had students scrambling in panic. The sound of coughing and gasping filled the air as smoke began to billow into the room. Outside, the sounds of chaos continued. The fear of being trapped with the fire inching closer set off a frantic struggle to find a way out. The desperation to survive was palpable. Every student was driven by a primal instinct to escape the flames. Mrs. Thompson, bolted for the fire extinguisher, yanked out the pin and advanced on the flames with a determination I'd never seen before. The room was filled with the hiss of the extinguisher. She then used its nozzle to wedge into the shattered window gap. When the wail of sirens finally sliced through the air, my body didn't know how to react. The PA system crackled to life, police were on site, the suspect was apprehended, and the lockdown was lifted. Then the door clicked open. We stepped out into the hallway, all wearing the same look, relief mixed with something darker. Later, the police told us that the guy who'd tried to attack us was mentally ill. Also, he was an escaped patient from a nearby mental hospital. He was not taking his medicines regularly and became out of control. Weeks went by. The school got a security makeover, new doors, rules, everything. Even the teachers had to take special training. We had counselors talk to us, but no one could shake the memories lodged in our heads. I still jumped at loud noises, and sitting near a door made my stomach churn. We'd come so close to losing everything, but we hadn't. It was a typical Monday. Kids at the assembly were as interested in the principal's announcements as they would be in a blank TV screen. You could almost see the thought bubbles of weekend plans and upcoming tests hovering above their heads. I was no exception, caught in my daydream until the word transfer student pulled me back to reality. After the assembly, my teacher caught up with me. "Rebecca, would you mind showing the new kid around? It'd look good on your student council application." "Yeah, sure," I mumbled, half in my world. I found Liam by the gym. His eyes were squinted at a school map. He looked normal enough, nervous maybe, but who wouldn't be on their first day? "Hi, you must be Liam. I'm Rebecca." I reached out to shake his hand. He nodded and gave a half smile, returning the shaker. I felt no red flags, just another student lost in the maze of high school hallways. During our walk around the school, I pointed out key locations to him: the cafeteria buzzing with the chatter of students, the library with its rows of books, and the modern-equipped science labs. He showed a keen interest in each area, but there was a subtle oddity in his behavior. I couldn't help but notice how he discreetly snapped photos of these places, explaining that the images would help him remember. The sense of strangeness escalated when he inquired about the security cameras. It struck me as unusual for a new student to be curious about such specifics. I rationalized that perhaps he was just exceptionally observant about his environment. However, his questions continued to grow more peculiar. He asked about the janitors, particularly their work schedules, which added to my unease. The situation took a more unsettling turn when he casually requested my home address. An alarm bell rang in my mind, signaling that something was amiss. I managed to sidestep his question, feigning forgetfulness about my address. His line of questioning, combined with his discreet photography, painted a concerning picture. It was as if he was gathering information for reasons beyond simple curiosity, and my instinct screamed that there was more to this new student than met the eye. Initially innocent, this encounter was slowly morphing into something that left me uneasy and suspicious. We started walking again, walking by a door marked "Basement Authorized Personnel Only." He perked up. "What's in there?" he asked, suggesting we look. I could see his facial expressions changing when I said no to him. I made a quick excuse, telling him I had a club meeting. I left him thinking he was just another new kid trying to settle into his new school's environment. In the next few days, my Snapchat was flooded with friend requests from names I didn't recognize. The first snap seemed harmless, just pictures of the school, then the street near my home. But then they got scarier, pictures of my car, and most shocking, my living room. That's when I put it together. The snaps, questions about the school and my address were Liam. I deleted Snapchat right then, my fingers hovering over the dial pad, unsure if I should call the police. But then I shrugged it off by assuming that I was overthinking. That night I was alone, the house quiet except for the movie playing on the TV. Suddenly, a series of footsteps echoed from upstairs, distinct and deliberate. I froze, my mind racing. Surely it was just my imagination. But as the sound persisted, a chill ran down my spine. I wasn't expecting anyone, and the thought of an intruder set my heart racing. In a panic, I rushed to my closet, a hiding spot that seemed close and secure. With shaking hands, I dialed 911, whispering my situation into the phone. My voice trembled, and tears clouded my vision, each second stretching into what felt like an eternity. The footsteps grew louder and more menacing, moving across the floor above me, each step amplifying my fear. As I crouched in the closet's darkness, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, as if someone was cautiously moving through the house. My breath caught in my throat, and I pressed my hand over my mouth, trying to silence my panicked breaths. The minutes dragged on, the sounds from above continuing intermittently. It felt like an age before I finally heard the distant wail of sirens approaching. Relief washed over me in a wave, but it was tinged with a residual fear that clung stubbornly. The footsteps abruptly ceased, replaced by the distant sound of doors opening and closing and muffled voices. The police arrived and searched my place, but found nothing. Well, almost nothing. On my coffee table, someone had scratched the words, "See you soon, Rebecca." The officers said it would be best to stay somewhere else that night. I agreed. The next day, I walked straight into the school's admin office. "I need to know more about Liam," I said. The staff looked confused, scrolling through computer records. "There's no Liam enrolled here," one of them finally said. My stomach sank. He was never a student. Time passed, days to weeks, weeks to months. My phone was quiet. No more scary snaps. But I was always on edge, my eyes constantly flicking to the rearview mirror, to passing strangers. That sense of normalcy I craved never came. Then, one night, my phone buzzed. It was late, the sky outside dark as ink. I saw it was a Snapchat notification. My finger hovered over the screen, reluctant. When I finally opened it, it was a photo of me, sleeping. The shot was taken from outside my window, the flash illuminating my closed eyes. "Sweet dreams, Rebecca," the caption read. I showed my parents. They were horrified, insisting we change all social media, get new phone numbers, anything that could cut this person out of my life. 4 years have passed since that night. I've received no messages or signs of Liam, but the feeling of being watched, it never left. Every buzz of my phone sends a jolt through me, a cruel reminder that wherever he is, he's still out there. When I was studying in high school, every morning was the same routine for me. Wake up, dress, trudge to school, sit in the never-ending drone of classes, and finally get home. Tommy and I had known each other since middle school, our friendship as comfortable as an old pair of shoes. Sarah joined our group last year. We were a trio united in our silent protest against the dullness of high school life. So when Sarah's text buzzed my phone during history, I didn't think twice. I caught Tommy's eye. He was doodling something I couldn't make out. We shared a look. We both knew. I texted back, "Let's do it." The walk to the court felt like shedding a skin. Each step away from the school seemed to peel off layers of boredom and routine. Tommy had his basketball and Sarah carried a Bluetooth speaker. The sun was out, the air fresh, our spirits high. Once we were on the court, Tommy passed me the ball. It felt like freedom in my hands. I took the shot but missed it, and we all laughed because it didn't matter. For the next few hours, we were too much lost in the game. We had just found our rhythm in the game when they appeared. A group of college students moving with a certain awkwardness approached us. The one in front, noticeable by his eyebrow piercing that caught the sunlight, offered an apologetic "sorry," explaining they had mistaken us for someone else. After their brief interruption, they disappeared further into the woods. I couldn't ignore the uneasy feeling that settled in my stomach. We resumed our game, the sound of the basketball net swishing punctuating the air. Lost in enjoying our game, We were jolted by a scream that seemed to tear through the calm. Sarah's basketball dropped with a heavy thud on the ground. Tommy and I exchanged a look, a silent understanding passing between us. Despite every instinct telling me to flee, a compelling force drew my feet toward the edge of the woods. I moved quietly, pushing through the underbrush, my breaths short and quick. It was then I stumbled upon a chilling scene. Two figures, their faces hidden behind masks, stood menacingly with baseball bats in their hands. The college students we'd seen earlier were sprawled on the ground, groaning from the apparent assault. I sought a safe spot to hide, but my attempt was futile. My gaze locked with one of the masked men. His expression mirrored my shock. In a swift movement, he drew a gun, pointing it directly at my forehead. The gravity of the situation was undeniable, and a cold fear gripped me as I stood frozen under the unwavering aim of his weapon. It's funny how everything seems to move slowly in moments of sheer terror. The bat rising and falling, the look of raw fear in the college kid's eyes, every sound amplified. I turned and locked eyes with Tommy and Sarah, my face telling them everything they needed to know. We ran like we'd never run before. We heard footsteps behind us, then a gunshot, but thankfully it was missed. After running for a few more seconds, we heard another shot, which was missed again. The branches of the trees lashed at us, but the sting was nothing compared to the fear driving us forward. We burst through the school doors, stumbling into the corridor, out of breath but alive. The janitor dropped his mop with a clatter, startled. Teachers rushed over, their faces a mix of concern and confusion. The alarm rang, a shrill contrast to the screams still echoing in my mind. The arrival of the police was marked by their serious expressions and the quick flick of pens on notepads. I recounted the entire ordeal to them, each detail spilling out steadily. Eventually, my parents arrived. A brief moment of relief surged through me, yet it was fleeting, overshadowed by the surreal nature of having to vocalize the events. The officer, after listening intently, concluded with a heavy tone, "They were drug dealers involved in a deal that went south. You're fortunate to have made it out unscathed." I acknowledged his words with a nod, but a sense of frustration was brewing internally. We were merely bystanders caught in the chaos, and what had we really observed? Faces obscured by masks, the threatening presence of baseball bats, and the pervasive sense of fear. These were the fragments of the incident, yet they offered little in the way of useful information for the investigation. This realization only added to the complexity of my emotions. The more I spoke about the incident, the more tangible it became, solidifying the horror of the experience into a concrete memory. Despite the officer's attempts to gather useful information, the lack of clear, identifiable details only served to highlight our helplessness in the situation. Back home, every little sound made us jumpy, me, Tommy, Sarah. Even the wind against the window felt like a threat. We'd all changed. We became quiet, distant. The carefree spirit of senior year was long gone. Nights were the worst. Sleep became a battle, every closing of my eyes a replay of that forest clearing. Sarah suggested we all go to counseling, but one look between us and we knew. No amount of talking could erase what we'd seen. We may have escaped with our lives, but we didn't escape the trauma.